Probably is not news to people who actually pay attention to these things, but this is the second game of a couplet, so to speak. There will be a rest day tomorrow, then 2 more games on consecutive days, and then there will be a rest day after game 11, which I'm not sure why I'm bringing this up now, but it was sort of news to me today, although it probably shouldn't have been, and I'm informing the audience that after game 10 there will be a rest day, and then there will be a rest day after game 11 to prepare for the final one. So
this is way too complicated for me. I'm not good at planning ahead. So tomorrow is a rest day.
yeah, tomorrow
Then there's 2 games. Then there's a rest day. Then there's 1 game. Then there's a rest day.
Yeah.
Then there's 1 game.
and then potentially a rest day and a tie
Theoretically,
break.
tie breaks.
Yeah, theoretically 1 more rest day and tie breaks.
Got it.
Yeah.
Let's check in with the audience. What's up? They're shouting D4 has been played. And as you've mentioned, they normally know stuff.
But yeah, it wouldn't be a huge surprise because he hasn't really gotten too far in the 1e4 games, at least not out of the opening. And yeah, D4 is
it's on the board, so we'll see. Karjakin, he played knight of 6 first game. I don't think that Trompovsky is going to make him change that first move. No. So he's probably going to stick to that. And then he can still, whatever he's prepared, if he's going to stick with his normal openings, Nimzo, Queen's Indian, if he, I don't know, Boris Gelfand for the last World Championship match, reinvented himself, prepared the Grunfeld, if I'm not mistaken. For Sergey, another logical twitch, which some people, I think, are expecting would be to learn one of the lines of the Queen's Gambit, which is always in very good shape.
Okay, knight of 6, knight of 3. I wonder if, one reason to do that would be to rule out the Volga, but I don't think Magnus is particularly worried about Sergey playing the Volga. So that might indicate some kind of a London or something along those lines. But
and D5. Sergey's old repertoire would be more knight f3, e6.
I think e6 would be what he in the candidates. I think in this position he would just snap play e6 and not even waste too much time on it. So that does seem to indicate that there were some changes made to to the normal order of things. As I think we all expected, because as mentioned, the Queen's Indian, when you do, as someone who's played more or less a single opening throughout my 25-year professional career, I know it's difficult to defend that perimeter.
Sorry to interrupt, but 3e3 on the board, which is not the main move in this position, let's put it that way.
This is actually something I used to be, intimately familiar with. That used to be my main opening in junior tournaments up to maybe the age of 14. I used to play the Colle system. This is basically, if he doesn't switch it up and go for c4 later, but that really makes no sense. If you want to play c4, you play it immediately. Although he might be...
Of course, the main line is the move c4.
Yeah. He might be ruling out Queen's Gambit accepted, but yeah, I don't really think so. So I think we will see something along the lines of Bishop d3 and one of those slower systems, but yeah, that's just Meran with an extra tempo. It's not supposed to be anything at all, but it's it's definitely playable at a junior level. I can tell you, I had about a 95% score with it, but that may have had something to do with the fact that I was.
Also goes to show that maybe both players are a little desperate with the white pieces to just get a position on the board, right? Because Carlsen, he doesn't want to keep making draws for sure.
No.
But this, goes to some length.
The longer the match continues along the lines it's been going so far, the more tense and the more, I think, nervous. Even Magnus, I think, is not completely immune from starting to,
Weren't you one of the gentlemen who cashed in on Magnus potentially having some nerves? No disrespect meant to your play, but I mean, in London, in the last round, you defeated him with black, where he was clearly shaking a bit, right?
Yeah, no, but he's had some experience since then, and he has grown up and matured.
Matured?
Yeah, so I don't know how much of an issue it is right now for him, but yeah, I think he probably would have expected to have done better in the first 7 games of this match.
And chances were there, but hindsight is 20/20. I'm gonna keep saying this every day. No punchline this time around, but 3e3. Let's explain a bit what this is all about. 3c4, of course, is the main line. Then, I'm not sure what Sergey would have done. e6, c6, dc4, all possible.
Yeah, there's plenty there that black can choose from. There's more or less the entire closed openings repertoire is still wide available for black. You can play the Slav, you can play e6, and after that you can switch to you can play the Rogozin if the choice is given to you. You can play the Queen's Gambit declined. You can play DC4 as mentioned, then switch to Queen's Gambit accepted. Plenty of options. But e3 does feel like Magnus is saying, yeah, I'm just going to play a game today. I don't really need any of this.
E3 is a bit more respected after E6 as well. Here people do play E3, even like serious people like Kramnik and so on play this quite regularly.
Kramnik has done that, yeah.
Bring the bishop out. But after D5, E3,
I'm wondering about
things
bishop
are a little
F5.
bit different.
I'm wondering about bishop F5 and just saying...
He's played E6.
So he just decided to completely ignore, all the additional options white is giving him, which is not a horrible decision, but...
Probably he's sticking to territory he's more familiar with, because after d4, knight f6, as you mentioned, knight f3, e6, this used to be his main line, and after e3 I do recall him playing games with positions like this.
Sure, bishop d3, and yeah, I can still vaguely remember some of that theory, and but the big question now is whether Magnus will be developing the bishop to b2 or just playing sort of the the absolute straightforward tempo up Meron with c3 knight bd2 and then d takes c5 and d3 e4.
So what you're saying is if black plays c5, which is the main move here in one or the other, two options are to play b3 bishop b2 or next move after castles, or to play with c3 knight bd2 basically.
And I used to play exclusively c3 knight bd2, and there I can still remember which setups I considered to be the most unpleasant for white.
Do you regret all these years of your lost childhood playing c3 knight bd2 systems?
Not really. As mentioned, I've had a tremendous score there, and it was mainly to do with the fact that the coaching I got at the Pioneers House. My first coach, he did instill a great love for the game in me, but he wasn't a great theoretician. So his focus was on setting me up with a repertoire which was playable against anything pretty much, because it's very difficult to stop white from making all these moves regardless of what black plays, frankly. And so he did give me that repertoire, and I mean, it served me well, well into my teens, and then at some point it stopped working, so I had to reinvent myself as a 1e4 player.
As Western Europeans, we think that you go to the Russian chess school, to your Pioneers Palace, and they teach you to play the Rui Lopez and all the good stuff from day one.
Depends.
But your story...
It depends. I mean, it depends on who is teaching you, and Now the big question is upon us. Sergey has played c5, so Magnus's next move will be a large indication of where he wants to go with this.
So the big decision is... I'm not sure if castle's a move, but in general, between c3 and b3, probably instantly, right?
Allowing c4, bishop b2, I think is just wrong. Although, maybe here you will be in time, but still, I mean, b5, b5, b3, bishop b7, a4, a6, I think. Yeah, and b3 played by Magnus, so yeah, that probably is not very advisable. Yeah, now I'm sort of no longer really any kind of an expert, because although I think this is a far better try in terms of getting somewhere, it's not something I ever played. So
it's a chess position, right?
Yes.
It's not heavily theoretical. I do recall that. Okay, normal setups. Don't quote me on the move order, but something like.
Yeah, the knight goes to
this
d2.
is quite typical. The bishop goes to e7 or d6.
And then at some point white plays c4 or knight e5 f4, yeah.
Or for some c4 or dc5 followed by c4 sort of ideas.
There are some incredibly famous games with the plan of knight e5 f4 and then potential attacks on the king side. Lots of history books are full of them. And,
is that this famous Lasker double bishop sacrifice you get with this stuff?
I'm not sure that's one. I think there's a Zuckertort game that may have also been from this opening, but I seem to recall some Zuckertort game where the f-pawn gets all the way up. Black plays knight e4, white takes with the bishop and then goes f5, and the f-pawn continues going further and further whilst black is collecting material. If we had time, I could look it up, but it's probably not very relevant. But generally, black is no longer really getting mated in these structures. People have learned how to deal with the the caveman style attack on the king side generally.
Yeah, but as mentioned, it's not the only plan White has, right?
Not at all.
In the old days, they used to do this exclusively. Then Rook F3, Rook H3.
Yeah, all this.
But
all
probably
this
you
kind of
can't
stuff.
checkmate Sergey like that.
Yeah.
But still, we have I don't know, is this position been played at World Championship level? Maybe some Zuckertort World Championship
Exactly, yeah. In the perhaps 100 and something years ago, in some of those really, really old ones.
Whom did Zuckertort play? Steinitz?
Yeah. Probably not since.
I'd be surprised.
I can't recall. I can't recall any matches that featured there. But once again, probably people on Twitter will correct us in a second.
It is curious, and Sergey is thinking. One thing I'm wondering, does his knight always go to c6, or could you make a case for putting it on d7 in some lines? I'm not really sure what I'm achieving with it.
I think it's fine on d7 as well. And well, if you expect White to at some point switch to the plans with c4, perhaps on d7 it might be reasonably well positioned to later play against. I mean, I think if you're playing against the hanging pawns, if let's say you imagine Black taking on d4, White takes with the e pawn, and then Black takes on c4, and White takes with the b pawn, so that structure arises.
I can follow this guy, but I'm a strong grandmaster. So people out there, do you know what hanging pawns are?
Yeah, let's.
If you go c4, okay, let's stop making arrows.
Yeah,
I call myself a strong grandmaster.
and it went uncorrected as well.
That's also true. Now, a lot of pressure on me to prove my strongness by finding a hanging pawns structure. Hanging pawns, DC4 is not a good move in this very position. But these are hanging pawns. The point you were making here, it's sometimes more fluid to have this knight on d7.
It sometimes goes all the way to g6 via f8 to stabilize the king side, because White will be trying to give mate with his bishops on b2 and d3. White's play is, heavily. White is heavily invested in making something happen on the king side and in the center.
And the point I was making made less sense, but I'm still going to repeat it, is that if, I don't know, as usual, run the move order, but if White plays plans with f4, you could also make a case for having the knight on d7, because you gain access to this square, and it could jump here very quickly.
Because from c6 it's often forced to go via a long route like e7, f5, d6, and here it has access to useful squares from the get-go.
Yeah, we see Sergey is keeping his options open by playing bishop e7, not committing this knight yet, which might be a smart idea.
Yeah.
We'll see what Magnus does, but his next couple moves should be easy. Castle, bishop b2, knight bd2, and then have a look
Pretty
around,
much.
right?
Even knight bd2 is not entirely forced, because I can imagine scenarios where White wants maybe to keep the option of developing it to c3. But yeah, castles and bishop b2 will in some order appear on the board.
Let's see what people have to say in the chat. Kramnik student says 1994 he lost to Anand in candidates. I don't think he's talking about either of the players, because in 1994 they were 4 years old, is that correct?
They weren't, at a competing age yet. Probably.
Magnus Carlsen is turning 26 at the end of this match. I think actually the day of the tiebreak. Sergey is a couple months older, is 26 already. So that does mean they were 4 in 94, right?
Yep.
I've been doing all kinds of interesting math today. For example, if they drew another 30 games in a row, Sergey Karjakin would overtake Magnus Carlsen as number 2 in the world.
Whoa.
I'm slightly cheating because I'm assuming no new rating list is coming out in between. But my point is he's winning 1.1 points per game. Therefore, if he won another 33, he would overtake Magnus Carlsen.
That's some good creative math there.
Thank you.
Very impressed with that.
That's what I'm known for.
Yeah.
Fabiano Caruana is hoping this match goes on forever because he will become world number 1 if they just keep drawing.
Yeah. As a cricket lover, I'm very much in favor of meaningless stats. That's a huge part of the enjoyment of the beautiful game.
Fair enough. And Karjakin is keeping this knight on b8, which, yes, kind of hinting at the stuff we were discussing. Maybe after bishop b2, you keep your options still open, go b6, knight b2, bishop b7.
Or maybe even bishop a6, actually.
That's another possibility, yeah. I never understand these things. Like, in theory, this is my good bishop, But in theory, this knight is also misplaced, and this square is a little weak, so I never know when to do
I
it.
think a larger problem is that bishop a6 doesn't force the trade because you can play c4. And c4,
For sure.
And c4 in many cases is what white wants to play anyway, so you're actually maybe misplacing your bishop simply because it just doesn't seem to serve any useful purpose.
Yeah. So
Is it time to bring up the youthful purpose norm joke?
I don't know that joke. Useful purpose? Norm MacDonald?
Yeah.
Please bring it up.
We'll wait until later in the show to do that.
Okay.
I think I tried it once and nobody at all, liked it or appreciated it or anything. So
Is it a play on words? Useful and youthful?
why
My
are you,
TH is not very strong, so...
why are you ruining my?
I'm asking, I don't know the joke. Did
Yeah.
you hear Norm wrote a book, sorry?
Yeah, I heard Norm wrote a book.
I haven't purchased it yet, but I want to purchase it because I want to support Norm MacDonald. And I heard it's a good book.
Yeah, people are saying it's a good book. He also, for some reason, attacked one of Canada's more famous novelists, saying she can't write for toffee.
But I believe that's because Canada's more famous novelist attacked Tolstoy, who's a big hero of Norm MacDonald.
Norm
not
feels,
a big hero of mine.
Norm feels that literature has not been the same since Tolstoy. Yeah, he is very, very outspoken on the subject, for instance, of Tolstoy being immeasurably preferable to Dostoevsky.
Do you believe people are very interested in what we're talking about?
Absolutely.
Because I strongly disagree. I couldn't make it through a single Tolstoy book, and I have tried actually. But I've read most of Dostoevsky's books, believe it or not, and they are mildly enjoyable, like given the times. But these Karamazov brothers and the stuff they're up to, it's alright. The Gambler or whatever it's called is only 100 pages, like I could get through that. But War and Peace, please.
Yeah, Norm would probably disqualify you from the human race for shoving or something, yeah.
Alright, bishop b2 on the board. My money's on b6. Like, this idea of not committing the knight makes sense to me.
Yeah, I think that probably is the point of not, because you are sort of brought up to develop knights before bishops. So I think the reason why the knight is still on b8 is that Sergey perhaps has not decided entirely. Yeah, he has played b6, so we are correct on that point. He wants to wait and see for.
One drawback could theoretically be knight e5, and at least you don't get knight c6 easily.
Yeah, you have to play
Probably
bishop
don't scare
b7
him,
first, but he was going to play bishop b7 anyway.
Sure.
And once
Knight
again,
e2,
there are
knight
options. We don't really know where this knight goes. We don't know if there is a major difference either. So.
Fair enough. So we'll see. It looks like Sergey is at least familiar with some subtleties here. Or, I'm not sure if these are subtleties, but I don't think it's the first time he's seen this setup.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much time they dedicated to preparing specifically against that.
Well,
but
probably nothing, but he's still, he's familiar with where the pieces go.
Sure.
And so is Magnus, obviously. But it does seem like, especially Magnus with white, is going to quite some length to get, well, the usual, a fresh position with pieces on the board, which is normally what he wants out of the opening.
People are asking how do you react to bishop a6 in these positions. I actually strongly believe that having played b3, bishop b2, you don't trade the d3 bishop for anything. So I would suggest you play c4 if the bishop appears on a6.
Let's
An argument could be made even for queen e2 straight away to completely stop it, but I think that may be a tempo you might later.
Queen doesn't always go here.
It goes there often though. It's not a horrible move. But after knight c6 you will have to waste a tempo on a3 as well, so that probably is too many tempi you will have to use up early.
Well, you go a3 often as well, but yeah, it sounds like we're using, what's the expression? I don't have an expression. We're going to great length to extinguish a very minor nuisance.
Yeah, I don't think it's required. I think you wait for bishop
you go
a6.
c4 and you say, haha, I want a tempo.
Yeah, because you are really not doing anything you would not have been doing anyway, really. Unless he really wants to sort of, I'm overusing the word really there. Unless
I don't think you really are.
Unless he is planning to double down on the giving mate on the king side idea and just doesn't want to play c4 at all, wants to go for knight e5 f4 and, you know, the old approach. There's a king on g8, I have two bishops on b2 and d3, I should open up diagonals, sacrifice everything, give mate.
Do it. Go DC right now.
It's actually not a stupid move. I've been thinking about that, but
I also was thinking about it because I don't want a knight on D7 to take on C5.
sure. But
So
I think black takes with the bishop, to be honest.
with the bishop.
Or maybe not, I don't know.
I'm not sure, but this structure, this bishop, it's better on E7, so we'll probably lose some time. And here white goes knight b2, queen e2, and either e4 or c4. It's a bit similar to yesterday's structure in that the pawn structure can become very symmetrical, but piece activity is very important. Here, I wouldn't be unhappy with white, to be honest.
You generally aren't unhappy with white.
You don't know me that
I mean, dc5, bc5, c4 would be
what I'm saying.
would be a different position to discuss. Yeah.
This changes the structure drastically, and now black could end up with the hanging pawns.
Exactly. Black is very likely to end up with the hanging pawns here, and it seems like white has a pretty useful setup against that, I think. cd5, e5, the knight will then get developed to c3 and not d2 quite certainly. Queen e2, rook c1, rook fd1, and you play against the center. It's a very lively position, actually. It's I'm not sure it's objectively better for white, but it's a very lively position.
And against Sergey, who's a great defender, but in this match he's been a little reluctant. I'm not sure if that's fair, but I feel it might be. Reluctant to attack. Like he's played this move, bishop takes c5, which was a bit of a defensive move. And it might be complicated for him to have a position with hanging pawns where he has to play for the initiative. At least that's the common belief.
The understanding is that black has to play for the e5, d4 break and try and create something on in the center or on the king side. Because if you passively hold these pawns for a long time, white eventually makes some progress. Let's say bishop b7, here you take, knight c3, knight b7. Queen e2.
Does the knight go to c3? I wasn't sure where it's going.
I think it's probably going to c3. There's knight e2, knight g3 here as a plan, which is not stupid, or maybe a 4 in some positions. There's also a very simple plan of just playing queen e2, rook e1, rook d1. But here, rook e8 followed by d4 might actually become a topic of discussion at some point. But I really do believe knight b2 is kind of because it has no prospects from there.
Just want to put the piece somewhere.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And actually for these positions, the bishop probably will have to waste a tempo to go to d6, so bishop b7 was a bit too modest. It really does look a lot better on d6, and if black ends up with the hanging pawns in the center.
Could be that's why Magnus is taking a timeout, because you could blitz out knight b2 here and then have a look around. But maybe he's thinking about, if he goes knight b7, then I'm losing this option, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, we actually managed to... chat is engaged currently in a very lively discussion of Russian classical literature, which is not something I expected to see sort of ever. But
the master margarita. And people have been accusing me of drinking margaritas as well, so it all comes together.
Yeah, a very very seamless transition there from
I do work on these segues. I know it seems to be effortless, but it is hard work. Anyway, go ahead. Russian literature.
No, I was just going to say I'm very, very impressed with chat for, picking up the ball and running with it there. I sort of expected to glance at chat and see people screaming at us for bringing this up, but that is not what has happened. So,
very cultured people out there.
Yep.
The Iliad, that's Homer, right?
Yes.
Are you a homer in this match? Another segue.
I don't know what that means.
It means rooting for the home team. No comment, so I'll take that as you're an objective spectator hoping to see some good chess.
I am employed as a commentator on the match, which means I'm supposed to be impartial, so I'm being impartial.
Is that part of the job? I never know.
I feel it is actually, yeah. I feel pretty strongly that it is, but once again, maybe it's all the years of me watching cricket and listening to very, very English commentators not supporting the England cricket team if it's not. I mean, or at least pretending not to support.
Is that a British thing, like understatement thing?
Maybe it is. Maybe it is just a very British thing. So maybe my.
I'm pretty sure U.S. commentators, they support their team, and watching NBA, you have local commentators that are clearly rooting for the home team. And as for me, I find it much more awkward to support anybody when I'm on site, when you have to talk to the players afterwards. then I'm very uncomfortable making predictions and so on and so forth.
Yeah, but here in the studio we are saved from that. So
it's a safe space.
It is a very safe space, yeah.
But still, yeah, I feel I used to have stronger opinions about whom I'm rooting for, but the more you talk about it, I don't mean this match in particular, but in general, super tournaments and chess, the more you comment, the least you lose your rooting interest. The more you lose your rooting interest. You feel the same way? Am I making sense?
I'm not sure. My eyes sort of glazed over somewhere midway through that segment, but you generally are right on many subjects, and you probably are correct on that as well. But
you're saying you didn't listen to me, but you're assuming I said something smart.
Not exactly.
No,
I did listen to you, but then at some point, like I lost my I could no longer follow your train of thought somehow. I don't know why that is.
That has happened to people before. Let's go back to chess. Magnus still thinking here. I do believe he's thinking about DC5, because else I don't see any alternative.
Well, you can play C4.
You can play C4, put the knight here.
That's I think he has... Queen E2 is not really a very serious option. It can be mentioned as like a minor option number 5, actually. Knight BD2, Knight E5, DC5 and C4 are all moves you can play here.
You can also play A3 if we're just listing moves.
Sure, but you don't really want to play A3 before Knight B4 is a thing. Yeah,
that's true.
All good. I actually went there on my own. Yeah.
You did, but I was going to ask you if you think that Sergey should C4 himself if C4 bothers him.
Whoa,
I'm expanding. Right?
You're spreading your wings there. No, I don't think forcing White to make a move he probably was going to make anyway is such a bright idea.
I could not agree more or less. What else can we say about this position? It's much harder when they don't play mainstream theory and I can cruise on prior knowledge. It's like in school when they ask you a question in the oral examination that you haven't prepared for, and then you have to think. Don't like it much. Do you have... No, I feel like I was gonna start asking about the Russian school system, but we're too early in the broadcast to do all these.
Yeah, and...
Knight BD2.
Yeah,
Bishop to B7.
I think in a blitz game you go Knight BD2, but this is not a blitz game, so I think Magnus is perfectly justified in exploring his options here. It's also a bit curious that he is thinking already, which may indicate that the move order Sergey came up with is kind of rare and flexible enough so that Magnus actually has to work out what he wants to do against it.
If you played this move order with 3e3, I would guess there's on your to-do list c5 could be quite high, bishop f5, bishop g4, g6, c6. I'm just naming moves, but g6.
Yeah, g6 I think is not too serious. I mean, you know he will change something in his repertoire, but he's not going to suddenly become a different chess player. And for someone who is not really much of a Slav player, and definitely someone who is not a Schlechter player, g6 you can discount, frankly, because there's no reason for black to suddenly enter Schlechter here. There's
just to be clear, Schlechter is not the German word, but it's Karl Schlechter who invented this setup, right?
Yeah, and I mean it's a playable setup, and Kamsky has been doing this for years with reasonable success, and other people as well. But it's sort of passive and is not supposed to entirely equalize. Therefore, after the third move e2, e3, to voluntarily enter it would feel a strange choice for Sergey, who doesn't really play g6 in almost any opening. So it's not natural for him to fianchetto his kingside bishop and dark square bishop, and g6 I think can be discounted. But
I agree with that. But my main point was that there's many things on your to-do list, even if you anticipate 2d5, which is not Sergey's main.
Yeah, but many of them will transpose into one another. Like if you play c5, white plays b3, I guess, if that's the system he wants to go for. And I think eventually we will very likely end up in in the same position. He did take on c5.
I'm not sure about b3 here, by the way. It's slightly off topic, but here the bishop, there's no e6 yet, so this looks a little...
yeah, actually,
looks playable for black, right?
3c5 does seem like it's a playable move, actually, here.
Should be, right?
Yeah.
Anyway.
I used to play c3 here, but since Magnus seems to be aiming for the positions with bishop on b2, 3c5 may have been a very smart choice, actually.
Anyway, dc5 and bishop takes c5 blitzed out. You were right. Sergey does not want to unbalance the structure unduly, which is also has been his match strategy, right?
Yeah,
Let's
I think it's very thematic for him to opt for the option which leads to a more balanced, more symmetrical type of structure. And in order to sort of avoid continuing going down that path, I think your plan with knight b2, queen e2, and d4 is maybe more attractive than going for the c4 c4 plans, because after c4 you're very likely to end up with positions which are very symmetrical in nature, with c and d files open and plenty of prospects for lots of material coming off eventually.
I think you keep the options though. I know these positions mainly from the black side, from these Vienna lines I play. You get many similar things. And if you have time to play knight bd2, queen 2, sometimes even a3, then you have all the options of going e4, b4, or c4.
Sure.
You can choose accordingly. I like it, because here black is... Normally, from the black side, the problem is you get a very quick bishop d6 and e5, or bishop d3 and e4. But here that's unlikely to happen. So yeah, I like the...
I mean, I quite like this for white, to be honest.
Yeah,
I think if you consider, the array of positions you can get in this system, this is one of the more attractive ones. You're very likely to get a small but stable edge here with white. But Sergey doesn't really mind those. He's been holding them for the entirety of this match, more or less.
That's how he plays. That's how they both play. But in general, Magnus Carlsen has been doing well in the openings, right? Especially with black, he hasn't suffered much. With white, it's harder to say for me.
Yeah, with black, I think he's not had a single worse position. I think.
You could argue about this h3, d6 Spanish, but it was
it looked scary. It looked scary, but he actually handled it really well. And yeah, I mean, we were initially very excited with Eric about white's prospects, but that plan with d4, I mean, and bringing the knight over to c4 does seem to solve all of those issues. But we're not gonna rehash game 4 once again. Yeah, knight bd2 of course played, because you don't want to play c4 too early to allow black an opportunity, give black an opportunity just to start trading along the d file. Queen e2 I think will also be played next move almost against anything, because you don't want to give black an immediate clear idea of what you're aiming for.
One thing I was curious about, and I think I know the answer, but just to be clear, after queen e7 you probably take a timeout to play a3, right?
Yes,
because you don't want this.
I mean, in this particular position, I would consider going e4 straight away, because you've allowed e4. I mean, immediately after, and you should uncheck the top, the top check.
Never.
Yeah, because here after bishop a3, I will take, I will play e5, and I think I might even have bishop takes h7 ideas there.
Oh, like in the good old days.
Possibly.
Mr. Zuckertort would be thrilled.
Although here king g6 might be an issue. Although, I mean, let's continue the variation. Queen g4.
F4 or queen g4?
Queen g4, knight e5, queen g3. I might still be doing quite well here, actually, with white. Very possibly. So...
might just be winning, right?
Could very easily be completely winning for white.
But actually, normally with... that's all. Maybe
Yeah, king h6 maybe is slightly better, but it probably transposes anyway, queen g4. I can give a check on h4 if all else fails, and get the same position again.
Back again.
Yeah, bishop b7 blitzed out by Sergey, so as expected, no need to give white an easy break in the center. White can prepare and push e4 on move 11 by playing queen e2, but then lots of light pieces will come off, which I think
this
Sergey...
doesn't look all that dangerous.
I used to play this structure with white quite a bit in some of those not exactly Colle variations, and you can make an argument for this being ever so slightly better for white, because the bishop on b2 is definitely better than the bishop on c5. If black tries to... Yeah, bishop b7, f6, if it does happen, if black is in time to trade them off, the position is very, very level. But sometimes white gets enough time to, let's say, force black to play knight f6. Then you plant the knight on e5, you play c4, and you have a little bit of something. But I think Magnus would prefer not to simplify this early.
Yeah, because also, I don't know, of course these are stereotypes, but in general I feel a slightly worse simplified position. Karjakin is so good in those.
And also, bishop takes c5 is a very large indication that this is what he now wants to happen on the board, because knight bg2, queen e2, and e4 is perhaps the first thing that occurs to you when you look at this. You want to start challenging the center, and as mentioned, it's slightly less symmetrical than the plans with c4. But it does trade off two pairs of light pieces, so black's life becomes more understandable and maybe somewhat simpler even.
I would play something like
Let's play a3, yeah, but to be honest, we were just making an argument that the bishop is fine on e7, so let's play, I don't know, queen c7 or something. Although a5 is perfectly playable, but...
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah, but you have a point. b4 doesn't seem like much of a threat.
Before I go to e7, and once again, you've sort of driven my piece towards a square. I don't really mind it occupying.
This is very close to...
Yeah, rook ac8, queen b8, or rook fd8, or something like that, yeah. It will not be easy to prove white has anything at all here, although you probably
Sometimes
prefer...
it does. Sometimes you push e4, e5 here.
No, in some of these positions it actually can be quite dangerous, because once again, the bishop on b2 is better than the bishop on e7. And white has more space, so perhaps a3, a5 should be chosen over this.
Yeah, but you just throw that in to have the b5 square, and now I don't know.
Yeah, maybe go. Yeah, and maybe then I will develop my queen to e7, and now the bishop on c5 will be extremely hard to challenge, and also the rook on a1 might actually be stuck to a1 for a while, because you need to pay attention to that a3 pawn.
Oh, very true.
In perpetuity.
Then again, I have options. I can take.
Sure.
Knight takes knight e4.
Yeah.
Pawn takes you don't want. Bishop takes is
e4, e5 becomes very much part of white's plans. Yeah, this position, despite looking very symmetrical, is actually full of those little details, and we could very easily have a very interesting middle game today.
Which would be great. We haven't. What was the order? 2 kind of boring-ish games, then 3 exciting games, then 2 boring-ish games?
I think that's fair.
So today, according to my math, we are at the start of 3 exciting games again.
Yeah, I mean, if you believe in symmetry in chess world championship matches, yeah, we are at the beginning of a stretch where lots of things will be happening. I'm not sure that's how it works though. I'm very much in favor of that being how it works, but I'm not sure it is.
I don't know what to say. If you don't believe in symmetry, then what do you believe in?
Randomness, chaos, entropy.
That's a very sad way to go through life.
I know. That's why I'm so sad. Look at me.
Now you look happy. Full of life. Youthful.
Yeah.
I got nothing useful to say about the position. That's why I'm already going to these awkward places leading us nowhere. It's gonna be a tough day. I have a feeling it's gonna be tough. But the game might distract us,
Yeah.
So queen e2.
No, I think we're still expecting queen e2. The immediate a3 might also be something Magnus could consider here, for, because if you end up playing c4, then maybe queen e2 is a waste of a tempo, and it might go to c2 in some positions. But he does play queen e2. Yeah, we expected that, and he checked some other options, but that was always going to be the favorite here.
I believe former world champion Boris Spassky said the queen is almost always best placed on e2.
Wise words.
There's something to it. It's normally a good square.
Yeah, it's a comfortable square here, and once again it keeps white's options very, very open here. And I expect Magnus not to commit to either e4 or c4. At least not to e4 straight away, because
Is it time for this knight to commit to a square?
probably. I'm sort of wondering if knight e4 could be a move, but I think it's way too early for it. Yeah, it just doesn't feel right somehow. Rook a1 becomes a move you need to consider, and even takes knight e5 becomes something to consider. I mean, it does take some pieces off the board, but it also lengthens the diagonal of the b2 bishop. It brings the rook into play to a file which will soon be very likely will be a semi-open file. So yeah, queen e2 knight bd7 played very, very fast by.
It's the most logical setup, leaving
Yes,
this
yes.
bishop open.
Yeah, now if Magnus immediately plays e4, I will be somewhat surprised, because I think once again he wants to continue giving Sergey options and not settling on a structure which will make Sergey's future play in this game very easily understandable, so to speak.
Yeah, then again, at some point you gotta decide on
Sure.
e4 or c4.
Sure, you need to make one of those two moves reasonably soon, but
So what
maybe
waiting
not
moves
just
do we
yet.
have? We could put either rook on d1.
Actually, that's something I wanted to point out. If you play e4 here and black takes everything off and plays queen c7 as we discussed, queen g4 might be a bit awkward. This is a very typical kind of an idea here, because yeah, it forces black to choose between g6 and e5, and neither of those two moves is necessarily very comfortable to make, although g6 doesn't lose and e5 also doesn't lose. But it does give white maybe some targets to play against. So perhaps after queen takes e4 you have to play bishop e7 first.
Or in this position.
Or here, yeah.
This feels like a standard setup.
Sure. And they actually, in some cases, they just completely ignore the ideas of knight takes f6. For instance, instead of bishop e7, it's not entirely unreasonable to consider queen c7 straight away.
Right.
Because I'm not sure white actually takes twice.
No, I agree.
Not 100% sure at all, because this structure is supposed to be, especially if the bishop on b7 is not traded, black sometimes becomes better. After bishop e4, I think Tivikov with white won a number of very instructive games, and I think he published some annotations in New in Chess claiming the structure is much better for white.
Really?
But Sergey has very strong opinions on things, and I'm not sure I agree with this particular one.
Tivikov, that is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if white was much better here. This looks perfectly playable for black.
Yeah, but he had some actually very thought out ideas about plans and where the knight belongs and how it can actually work around the bishop, the dark square bishop, which is supposed to be a better piece in position with play on two flanks.
Can we checkmate so? Probably not. Huh?
Probably not, but yeah, I don't expect Sergey to do this sort of ever. But I just wanted to, since we're discussing structures here, and it's going to be a while until we can discuss something very concrete happening on the board, because I think, once again, I don't think the structure will get settled so early. So I thought I should mention that sometimes they just completely ignore this.
I want to do something more drastic here. I'm not sure any of
Yeah,
those are going to work.
I mean, it might backfire for concrete reasons, my idea of playing queen c7. Yeah, which is why I think bishop e7 is a bit more sane, your move here. But even here I might maybe consider going knight g5.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about. Sometimes I do this, and then there's even knight f7, so knight e6 is in the air.
Magnus
It's a
actually,
slippery slope.
Magnus actually plays c4 sort of more or less straight away.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah,
So you're saying there's enough play in, I'm assuming knight takes,
yeah, knight takes, yeah.
in this structure, with either e4, e5, or maybe some piece play, just gaining space. But of course, it is a symmetrical structure.
But he's saying that his pieces are slightly better positioned here,
It's true.
and he might get some play in the center. In particular, e4, e5, I think, is the plan White should be trying to implement here. Because if you do nothing for another 3-4 moves, black will play queen e7, rook c8, rook d8, and stabilize. And
I'm never sure about queen e7, because it takes the square away from the bishop.
sure, I think I'm always meeting a3 with a5 here. I think it's very much part of my plans here. Okay. And I'm not even sure you want to play a3, because once again, with the queen on e7, it will create additional ideas for black. Like you play rook a d1, black might consider playing something like bishop d5, attacking the pawn on a3. It's a very stable setup. I also expect Sergey to take on c4 here, because if you don't, you might be faced with a somewhat unpleasant decision on the next move after white takes on d5. Because if you take with the bishop, you give white too tempted to play e4, a5.
That's what we gave, right?
Yeah.
Here.
But here, actually
this
without the inclusion of a3, a5, there will be bishop a3. So after queen d7, in particular, in this particular position, you want to include a3, a5 to have knight e4 here, which trades the knight for the bishop on c5. Although even that is not
Still
really
not
the end of the world. Yeah, like
story.
because here bishop c4, bishop a6 probably is fine-ish for black. But it's playable. You do get a bishop against a knight, and if you manage to, let's say, play knight somewhere and play e4 and f3 and drive the knights away, you will be slightly better.
Yeah, interesting choices early.
Yeah, but
c4.
Well, I think Magnus got what he could have potentially. He is not objectively better here, but
he's not worse. Like if anybody's better, it's white.
Yeah, but I think it's fairly level. But it's a position with 30 pieces on the board, where black will not have any. Well, after cd5 there will be less, but fewer. But currently there are 30 pieces on the board, and it will be very difficult for black to initiate mass trades here. So we're playing a very complicated position simply because there's just so much stuff left on the board. Yes, it's somewhat symmetrical, but there's still a lot of life in it.
Yeah. No, I agree. That's As mentioned, normally you get these kind of positions with black, and there I'm always arguing. You can win these positions. What's Sergey gonna do? What other options are there? dc4, I agree.
dc4, queen e7, and rook c8 are, the three more obvious ones.
Yeah, rook c8.
Maybe there's an argument to be made for an immediate a5, but it looks a bit vague, to be honest. Like you hint at maybe playing a4 if an opportunity is given to you. Maybe.
It does feel weird though.
Yeah, but just making this move when nothing is forcing you to does feel like you could have spent the same tempo improving some of your piece positions and not committing to a structure.
Great. I think it's safe to say the players are left to their own devices here. I don't think this position has been part of their preparations, at least given the time spent. Even though Sergey has been playing quickly, and
dc4 knight takes c4. Magnus continues playing very fast, but so does Sergey actually. And yeah, this is like a weird Queen's Gambit accepted, where white played d takes c5, but for some reason the queens didn't come off, and
I used to do that. I used to play this system.
Yeah, in the Foreman this does happen, but I think in general in the Foreman you're supposed to go for e4, e5 as early as possible. You're not supposed to give black time to fully develop. I had some games in that system as well, I think, but
no, yeah, dc knight c4 looks fairly natural. It's minor. But the one plus you have, or play queen e2, and the setup bishop on c5, knight on d7 is slightly inferior.
Yeah, queen e7 already played by black. We've actually discussed this position, and
a3, a5 is what.
A3, a5 we think is likely to happen, because although actually you don't need to, you can play something like rook a d1, and if bishop a3 ever happens, you have the a1 square to avoid the trade of the bishops.
Or bishop takes a3.
Yeah, if you want to. I mean, obviously with knight gone from c4. I'm not sure if you want to play e4 this early.
That's what I was wondering about.
It does gain some space, but it also sort of commits to a structure. But I think it's very much a possibility here, because you do want to restrict the bishop on b7. You also restrict the knight on f6. You make black's life somewhat less comfortable by doing that. I think it's very much one of the moves you can discuss with white here. But you don't want to play e5 early. I mean, you play
That's
e4.
What I was going to say, this is very double-edged.
Yeah, you play e4 and then you hold. You play like rook a d1 here. You might want to maybe play bishop b1 in some positions too, although bishop a6 might become a reply to that.
Bothers me I can't play h3. Not that I need to, but like these squares are a little soft.
Yeah, in fact, sort of in expectation of eventually playing e5, I was thinking about playing g3, but it looks extremely weird with the bishop on d7. But controlling the f4 square might not be a stupid idea at all, because once you play e5, the knight will go to one of the squares from which it can jump to f4. Here you probably play queen e4, but especially with the rook already on d8, black has knight f8, knight g6.
Here you can be worse with white very easily, as I've done many times.
Easily,
this can backfire if you don't checkmate.
Which is why I said that you play e4 to restrict black, and then you don't play e5 until you're absolutely ready, because e5 actually gives black a lot of very usable squares, and the bishop on b7 feels extremely happy about that move as well.
We'll see. It's a big decision in a way. It doesn't look like. Looks innocuous enough, but e4 or not e4, a3, a5 included or not. It's a lot of small subtleties.
You don't need to commit to anything just yet. You can play rook a d1. Although there's also a question of where your rooks belong here, because it looks natural to play rook a c1 and rook f g1.
Does it?
But on the other hand, black will do the same. And then once pieces start coming off, they will perhaps come off in droves, because lots and lots of trades will be offered once the first one is offered.
That's always a curious thing with these open files. We all learn to put rooks on open files, but often it just leads to exchanges, which helps the defender. And as the attacker, that's why, to my mind, rook a d1 does look a little more natural to keep more attacking potential on the board.
Sure.
What's up with the chat? I believe we have reached an impasse. Sergey is in a good place mentally, according to Mr. Coder. MC might make a comeback today, though. Do you agree with both of these statements?
That actually immediately brought to mind a bit of a rant I was planning for today, but I will probably refrain from it for the time being. The short answer is no. I don't think Magnus needs to stage a comeback. He's not behind, and I'm not at all sure just how comfortable the match state is for Sergey as well. I think both of them will be quite nervous by this point, because it's very difficult to judge who is where in the match, and there are fewer games available to both of them to do something. So.
Do you believe either of them are bothered by the public or the social media screaming, stop making draws, 7 draws in a row, or they just don't read these things during match?
I wouldn't, and I don't know what their approach is, but I always find it completely counterproductive to follow what is being said about tournaments I play, and in particular important tournaments where I sort of deeply care about the result, because it's very unlikely you will read something that will cheer you up immensely, and very likely that you read something that will
greatly upset you.
Yeah, leave you fuming and wanting to break things. So. No, I don't think they care. They're playing a world championship match. They're doing it to the best of their ability, and we've been somewhat critical of the level, but that's not for lack of trying. That's just, I think, both of them not being for some reason at their peak form, not them, not caring enough to play their best chess. And yes, the games were drawn, but I mean, it's not. It wasn't going to be extremely unlikely to happen.
The question is also, I believe there's a slight tendency of the internet. I consider myself part of the internet, to complain no matter what happens, right? If the score would be, let's say, +2 in Magnus's favor, we would probably say this match is boring, it's over. What are we doing here, right? I would say that.
I'm not sure about the latter part of your statement, but yes, people will complain almost regardless of what's happening.
Well, my point is that even though I agree that the chess content, okay, stakes is high, blah, 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 and 7 draws might not have been thrilling, but that means that the struggle is intense and the match is very close, right?
Yeah.
So there is a lot of intrigue.
Yeah, and in some ways it's going sort of contrary to expectations, because at some point I started boring myself, so to speak, because I've given a number of interviews on the subject, and at the 15th time of trying, saying Sergey will be the better prepared of the two players started sounding extremely uninteresting even to myself. But that hasn't been the case. That is, the one surprise I've taken away from the first 7 games, because I honestly expected Sergey to to be somewhat better prepared and to perhaps pose some problems with white and have no issues with black. And that hasn't really been the case. I think Magnus is winning the opening phase comfortably in terms of getting what he wants.
Yeah, which on the other hand could also put Sergey in a good space mentally. If you say he's losing the opening battle, he's whatever 70 points low rated, and the score of 3.5, 3.5.
Sure.
Something must be going right for him, right?
Sure, but I mean, I was never really of the opinion that the gap is so huge. Magnus is the better chess player. The record proves that. I don't think anyone, including Sergey, would
argue that.
Yeah, would argue against that. But I don't think the gap is such that you can just say they are, in completely different leagues or something. And, when Magnus is not playing at the absolute utmost of his ability, well, what we're seeing could very well be happening.
And maybe that's the realization that Magnus has been coming to. Maybe he thought this might be easier, and it's not.
Once again, I try as hard as possible to stay away from the psychobubble concerning other people's heads.
I know, and I try as hard as possible to get you into other people's heads, but
Yeah,
so far
not
not going to be able to do it.
not right now. Maybe eventually, but
Okay. Yeah. All right, then chess, queen e7. What move do you think is likely?
you want to be seen doing something, I think, which is why e4 is you're kind of drawn to e4 because it's a move which changes something, seemingly improves your position a little bit, but it still doesn't create a threat as such, and because of that, maybe Magnus is somewhat reluctant to play it.
If we want to create a threat, a3 is the move.
Yeah, but then
Carries a threat.
as mentioned, after a5, you are very unlikely to ever actually play before. And you might have to play a3, a4 later, actually, because it might, as pointed out, it might be hanging in some lines.
Is this bad for me, though? Could argue that b6 is weaker than b3.
You could, but
Not sure I'll win that argument, but I could make the point.
You could, yeah. But even if it is, it's not going to be by a lot. And yeah, stopping knight d5 actually, although, I mean, in particular with the pawn on a4, but maybe even in the current position, I would play e4 to just limit that.
Takes queen e7. Let's say I play rook d1. Even here, knight d5. You say?
I'm not sure it's a great move, but it's a move you could consider with black, yes.
Now I'm tempted to do your
g3 and d4. Yeah, I have the b4 square, but it actually, it becomes a plan because knight before bishop b1. I'm fine with that. And as long as the pawn stays on e4, I'm not really that worried about playing g3 because the bishop on b7 will not really create any threats along the long diagonal.
True that.
Yeah. Rook a d1, rook a c1, e4. There is some argument to be made for knight e5, but I think it's unlikely because I don't think Magnus wants to trade pieces. Simply, I mean, as simple as that. I don't think Magnus wants any pieces coming off immediately.
What's the time situation? He's been thinking for a while now, right? Or does it just feel that?
10 minutes.
Okay,
our
it's
website
not,
says. Yeah, 10 minutes
not
is not
out of the ordinary.
Not a lot. Yeah.
Having a look around after the opening, very often, like 25 minutes can just disappear while you're having a look around, right?
Sure. Although in this position, you probably, in particular in this position, you probably want to be playing reasonably fast because it does feel like you will have a lot of these types of decisions where there is a number of options available to you which are very hard to distinguish between and like people have been known to get completely preoccupied by the which rook to d1 type question, and here I think in the next 5 moves you
just take one.
Yeah, I think in many cases just picking an option and sticking with it is a good thing because.
Do you use some sort of, what do you call this game theory when you play yourself and you think, okay, I have these 2 moves, they're similar, so it's probably not great for me to spend 20 minutes on the decision if it's not going to affect the outcome that much?
I do, but I'm not sure if this is the right approach. But I am, I try to be very practical about these things because for me time management is very important. I know
You don't get in time travel much, do you?
I do these days, and I don't feel comfortable at all in time travel. Not the way I used to. Let's say when I was younger, I used to have horrible time troubles, and I also used to feel like that's not an issue. I wasn't worried at all. Now I don't get them as much, but when I do get them, I feel like I shouldn't have. And this is why I try to manage time better.
Yeah.
A3 played by Magnus, which is a move we mentioned.
Threat.
Yeah, we expect Sergey to more or less blitz out A5. There's really no reason to allow B4 and end the trade of a knight for a bishop. It's just
Great.
yeah.
I'm wondering if this
I'd be
opens
shocked if anything else happened.
some new plans, but bringing this knight to B5 feels very out of place.
It's not really doing anything there,
No.
and.
Maybe you go E4 now.
You go E4 now. Black goes. I think actually starting with Rook FD8 makes a lot of sense here, because I think I might actively want to play Knight F8, Knight G6.
Right. Looks solid for Black actually.
Yeah. I think the Knight on D7 is the one piece Black could have complaints about in his setup. So finding new squares for it, I think, is very much part of the agenda.
And Karjakin did blitz out A5 indeed.
Oh, yeah.
No surprise there.
That's not any kind of a shock, yeah. But yeah, on the black side, I feel that Rook FD8, provided white doesn't do anything which requires immediate attention, Rook FD8 is very likely to be the next move, because I think Knight F8 G6 is a very decent plan against almost anything.
That does look like a very good plan.
Yeah.
Then again, after Knight G6, G3, as you mentioned, is sometimes not the end of the world, right? Because
No, of course not, but it also covers your king side additionally, because if white does play for E4, E5, it very often signifies that white goes sort of all in on some kind of attack using the bishops on D3 and B2. And having more pieces in front of your king is definitely very, very useful for those scenarios.
yeah, this is a little awkward. I'd like to play Rook D1, but Knight G4 is already bothering me a bit.
Yeah.
And I'm
No,
not
E4
comfortable playing A3.
E4 is a very committal move. You need to connect it to something. You don't really just play it and hope for the best. Also, with the inclusion of A3, A5, are there any positions in which black could consider playing B5? I think the answer is probably no, because it will hang. And driving it from B6 to B4 actually gives white targets to play against later.
So let's make a move here.
Yeah,
B5, you
B5.
just go where? Maybe there's tricks, not A5.
Maybe even 95 is playable, but I thought maybe even 95. I don't feel like I need to keep pieces on the board. 95, B4, and maybe even A4.
Or takes.
Or
It
takes,
looks like,
yeah.
yeah. Black has done more harm than good to his
Yeah,
position.
I think black should not be doing this. I think it creates objects you can play against for white.
No, you want to do this.
Yeah, Rook FD8, and you continue waiting for white to commit in the center, and then Knight F8 might become a very useful move.
I struggle finding a plan. I don't really like E4, and it's not obvious for me to go
that's
there.
the issue.
Of course, you can exchange pieces, but then you're not gonna win.
Yeah. No, if you initiate trades via the E5 square, it's very likely that once a pair of light pieces come off, it becomes much easier for black to start trading along the D and C files. Because with all the light pieces still on the board, I think white will easily avoid most trades here. But once they do start coming off,
Yeah, it's not easy.
no, not at all. And we keep on saying this is not a setup which promises white advantage. It's a setup which is mainly aimed at keeping most pieces on the board and just playing.
But how do you play? Let me try this move, just to make a move.
Okay. Somehow I feel very emotionally attached to this idea, so let's continue along the same path. Let's go Knight F8.
I was hoping to scare you away from it,
With 95.
95.
Yeah, 95.
but maybe it's not doing much.
Well, it's annoying. I shouldn't have allowed that. Yeah, okay. G6 with the idea of E5, but once
I
again,
didn't think about that, but it's very double-edged.
it's very double-edged and driving the knight toward. 94 has been played, so
see.
well done, sir. Is e5, knight f5, queen a6 completely ridiculous? Is e5 even going to be met by knight f5? I'll go further.
I don't know. E5, even knight b5.
Yeah, exactly.
Looks like you're overextending.
I'm definitely extending. Whether it's overextending or not is the question. Yeah, that's what I was hoping to discuss with you.
No, I think you're fine. But I like knight b5.
Yeah, I think this is probably a better option.
I'm hoping for queen e6, knight c7.
Queen c6? Why are you hoping for this?
Oh boy. I should not hope for such things.
Yeah. Be careful what you wish for.
That is... I had this discussion the other day. Be careful what you wish for is Thomas Mann, der Zauberlehrling.
I have no idea where it comes from.
Let's find out. Because this is a show about literature as much as anything. And I've read like 8 books, so I know a little something about these things. Be careful.
Yeah, it's already there. You don't need to continue typing.
Who you call ugly. Oh no, that's the first hit, yeah? That was literally the second hit. It's a movie, Elizabeth Ellen.
No, that's not the origins. That's just the top results. But the origins must be something else. Yeah.
Fortunately, I found the site jamie.workingagenda.com, which looks as good a source as any. Goethe, Yesterday, James Joyce, Ulysses. That's another book I tried to read, but it's so confusing. I have no idea where it's coming from. We try very hard to find out. Didn't matter. Sometimes you just gotta admit, I tried, I did my very best, I failed.
Yeah,
Let's not go down that rabbit hole
after all
any
of
further.
29 seconds of actually.
These are the times we're living in. We have shorter attention spans. There's many valid theories out there that humans are getting dumber by the minute because our attention span is so short. We can't read a book anymore, we can't study stuff. I can't even sit through like a drama 45-minute episode. I need Rick and Morty, 20 minutes, that's it.
I can sort of relate, yeah.
Which is why we're watching this game and hoping for it to last 6 hours.
I think that's an overstatement. We're hoping for... I think it's extremely likely that we will get what we're sort of hoping for today, because this position is not boring. This position is probably very level, but I don't think it's boring, and I don't think it's likely to become boring, to be honest. It's very difficult to...
I have plans.
Yeah, I'm
not good plans.
I'm not sure it's headed that way. If White is given a move here, do you think he plays f3? Probably not, yeah.
I learned generally, but I don't think it applies here, that you want to get whatever, f3, king h1, always f3, e4 against knight f6, bishop b7, but I have a feeling the pieces aren't correct for this.
That's why I was asking, yeah, because it's and once again we come to my windbreaker / wave breaker discussions, but yeah, those pawn setups severely restrict some of Black's light pieces, but with the bishop on c5, maybe it's a bit too ambitious to start moving the pawn away from f2. Rook d8, rook d1 on the board, not unexpectedly.
We've covered this position.
Yeah, not unexpectedly, and for the time being, knight f8 is a bit awkward because knight e5 creates immediate threats. Although maybe
not the end of the world.
Yeah, maybe you could just play rook c8 here. Queen c7, knight b5, you continue getting kicked about, but rook c8 followed by knight g6 might actually be a playable response to that. But yeah, bishop b5. It doesn't feel like Black should allow this, although
I feel like I'm touching some.
Yeah, it's not a lot, but it does feel like you've given White a bit too much liberty here, and yeah, I don't expect this to happen.
I agree.
So
what do you play? Rook c8.
Rook c8 is one option. You probably don't really touch your pawns on the king side, right? You don't really want to commit to anything, because h6, for instance.
Certainly don't want h6.
Yeah, because
stops you from fighting for this square.
Exactly. You don't really want which one of those two moves which will be more useful in the future, and also playing h6 makes ideas of knight f8, knight g6 weaker for the future. So
same applies for white. The stuff we were looking at earlier, especially if we play e4, then h3 is awkward, g3 is generally awkward. So I guess you don't touch anything.
yeah, you don't. Yeah, this is why this position is so intricate, because there seems to be a lot of options, but you need to weigh them carefully. The most neutral move, I think, is rook a8, the move that doesn't look like it spoils anything. It controls the c6 square, so perhaps you can then play knight f8 because knight e5, knight g6 will become possible.
Even rook a8 loses sight of the a7 square, so I could dream of a world where my rook lands on a7. But not
yeah,
at the cost of a pawn.
Probably not immediately, yeah. So rook a8 does feel like it's your blitz option, so to speak. The most neutral move you can make, with your hand, so to speak, without really going into deep into the intricacies of various move orders here.
Right. Even though it's easier if you're left-handed to play rook a8.
True that. Do you ever want, let's say, if you play rook c8, it becomes theoretically possible to do on the next move. Do you ever want to play bishop b4 and trade a pair of bishops off?
In general, I believe no.
Yeah, I think
I believe this square is more important than this nominally strong bishop.
Yeah, that was my impression as well, because the c6 square is perhaps the one target you can name for the future for white here, and trading off the bishop on b7. The bishop on b7 currently is, it doesn't look at all worse than the bishop on d3. Yeah? So spending 2 tempi to trade it for its counterpart feels extreme.
Also, it opens up all kinds of squares for white potentially, right? Like
queen f3, queen g4, all these moves, yeah.
Apart from, obviously, this jump. So, yeah, I don't think it's high on your to-do list.
Sergey actually has a 20-minute buffer here. He has an hour and 20 against an hour and 3.
Wow, he's blitzed out the opening.
Yeah, he's been playing very fast. Once again, I think recognizing that this will be a game in which a lot of decisions will have to be taken. So I think managing time properly will be very important today.
It does seem that that's another part of his, I don't know if there's really a match strategy, but I've had the feeling that he's played reasonably quickly, even when he's out of book or when there were tough decisions, to my mind, to be made. He's put a big focus on playing fast, not getting into time trouble.
I think that was, once again, we don't know any of this for sure, but it does feel like maybe that was something that was additionally drilled into him as preparation for the match. That you don't want to foil, at least seriously, behind Magnus on the clock, because he will put relentless pressure on you to solve problems every move if he senses that you are uncomfortable with the clock.
Let me check one thing. Maybe I can't check that one thing. Oops, sorry. No. I'm trying to break the system again.
Please don't.
Okay. No breaking the system today. So we are expecting rook ac8, and then it's not obvious what Magnus's next move is. Is it? Rook c1 you could do, but it leaves this guy unattended. Therefore, I'm not quite sure. No, I meant the position after knight d4. 14.
Sure.
Yeah, just say.
Sure.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's a glitch.
That's a glitch. Huh?
That's a glitch. I check that.
Anyway, what I was saying is rook ac8 looks logical. Not that obvious to me that rook ac1 is also logical. So I'm not sure what white does here.
Yeah, continuing with the declared knight path might be useful. Like
knight b5 already?
Knight b5 creates a threat of knight d6, which is actually a serious threat.
Did not see that one.
That will have to be dealt with by either knight f8 or putting something on d5, because if you allow knight d6, you will end up with a very, very poor position.
Let's show. Yeah, this is a bad move in general.
Yeah.
Just to illustrate.
Yeah. Takes, and you cannot take again. Yeah, because bishop h7 collects the queen. So by allowing knight d6, you are giving up either one or both of your bishops for both of white's knights, And yeah, that position is horrible.
This is not what you want against Magnus Carlsen or anybody, but
Yeah.
especially Magnus.
Yeah, the understanding is that such positions are... Saying they're lost is perhaps an overstatement, but
No, this is almost hopeless.
yeah, they are really, really horrible. White sometimes fails to win them, but that's because people aren't really conditioned to play perfectly.
People are people, so what could it be?
Yeah, so knight b5, black will need to do something. Let's go back to rook a8, knight b5, and discuss some moves which are stronger than h6.
Okay.
Like knight f8 is now possible because knight e5 is not really a move. There is bishop e5 though, renewing the same threat.
Touching the private parts.
Yeah, which is why, you know, rook ac8. You need to weigh your options after knight b5. Sergey will be aware of knight b5, knight d6 ideas, of course.
So one day, doesn't have to happen, but there's things in the air before knight b6.
No, this is a very concrete position. It depends on whether black can play knight g6 here, and you know, if there is no tactics here. For instance, if you play like bishop d6 here, I think black can actually take everything. Rook c8 has been played in the meantime, so we might see all this. So I take, and after bishop c6, I think I have queen c6, and I end up ahead because I will pick up that bishop next move. Unless I'm blundering something, but I don't think that I am.
I'm trying, but I do not see it. Rook a8 played. No surprise here either. For Magnus, yeah, tougher decision. Rook ac1 you can do. Does it help your case?
Yeah, we're not sure we need rook ac1, and once again, yeah, you keep on mentioning some, you know, strange land in which b4 followed by the rook landing on a7 is a possibility, and it's not an unreasonable idea, but mainly you don't want to leave the pawn on a3 potentially hanging for the future, and rook ac1 doesn't seem to be doing very much currently.
I agree, but we need a move. That's my main problem. Okay, knight b5 I understand.
No, knight b5 is a move. Knight b5 definitely is a very concrete option here, because as mentioned, it's not a joke threat, it's a very, very serious threat that black will need to find a solution for. So, you know,
what other options is there? That was correct grammar.
rook
Oh,
ac1.
rook ac1.
Rook
As
ac1.
mentioned, obviously this improves your position greatly.
Well played, sir. It's a bit weird that Magnus has played this move so fast, but maybe he also doesn't really want to spend too much time in positions where obvious moves are available to him.
Yeah, this is the last obvious move either of them has.
Yes,
Now it's
sure.
decision time. Can you go knight f8, or is allowing knight e5 a problem? Can you go h6 or g6?
But that actually is something,
E5 a move.
yeah, like
That's
after knight f8, knight e5, bishop takes a3 becomes a move you need to consider. It probably isn't strong because knight c6 might win it.
Jump.
Yeah, I can't find any tactics. I thought maybe there will be some tactics connected with, you know, maybe white's pieces will be slightly imbalanced, but doesn't seem like it. But yeah, I mean, knight b5 was a very serious alternative to rook c1, and just as yesterday, for instance, where Magnus has taken like a minute and a half to play castles after
That was
knight,
strange, yeah.
after knight b4, bishop f3, where he had a very serious option. He, you know, could burn some time considering. He didn't really need to play f5 if he didn't like it, but yeah, let's do that for no reason at all. Yeah, there was this option. There was this option yesterday to play f5, which maybe still eventually leads to positions which will be drawn. But
I checked a bit for my highlight video. It's not so easy.
yeah,
I thought
and
the best was this, but then you take bishop f6, and black is
no,
pressing.
Magnus would go for this in a heartbeat. It is actually slightly better for black here, and but as I said, even if you don't see all these things and you end up not playing f5, you should check. He had plenty of time at that moment in the game, and the fact that Castles was more or less blitzed out was a bit mystifying to me yesterday. And just as, I mean, rook ac1 here was played according to the website, he spent a minute and 20 on this move. It wasn't a forced move.
No, once again, maybe it's mutual match strategy that they're both very focused on avoiding time trouble. Magnus, his weakest moment in the match was game number 5, where he thought that he had to make move 40 in a hurry, even though it was move 41, and he blundered with king g2. And it could very well be that, I'm not sure if he's had a talk or if he's decided for himself, I'll play faster, if in doubt, make the natural move. And Sergey continues in the same vein as well. Blitzes out knight f8. What is this, a blitz game? Like, it's really getting...
But not... Sergey I can actually understand a lot better, because that was very much part of his plan. We kept on mentioning this idea, and now that he's secured the c6 square and is ready to meet knight e5 with knight g6, I think he feels perfectly comfortable making this move. And one thing I will also mention, with a rook on a1 here, your move b3, b4 would have been at least an option you could consider. Whereas here, if you continue the variation, b4 takes, black takes on b4 with the bishop, you take on b6. Black just plays rook takes c1, and he's perfectly fine because, you know, pieces coming off, bishop a3, even continue trading pieces with every move. Yeah. Draw is more or less imminent. Whereas with if you imagine the same position after knight b6, just bring it up, the one move 19 in this line. If you imagine the rook being on a1 here, black has no immediate trades. Black, you know, the rook has to go potentially to some maybe slightly awkward square. You can play rook a7 next move or something. And that would have been an option at least. Whereas now with the rook on c1, as mentioned, once pieces begin to vacate the c and d files, rooks will start coming off. And that's very much in black's favor here, I think. So
another short working day?
No, I still don't believe this game will be short, but I think I'm a bit surprised with the speed they're playing at, to be honest. It's a complicated position.
I agree.
And you know, time trouble is not something you need to be worried about straight away right now. And
plans is what you need to be worried about.
Yeah.
I don't see a plan. Knight b5 no longer makes a great deal of sense, does it? There's no threat. Oh no, you can't even go knight g6, I'm guessing. I do not see a follow-up to this operation.
No, I think the inclusion of rook ac1 actually made a number of variations more comfortable for black rather than less. So, yeah. Sort of, you know, guild solidarity always prevents me from harping on, but I do feel that...
guild with a D or with a T?
With a D.
Oh,
you know,
okay.
I never feel, you know, very comfortable, in particular when people playing are better players than I am.
But you're a pundit. Be harsh. What is Magnus doing? This rook ac1 move was a little superficial, maybe.
The move is not horrible, but it didn't need to be played this fast.
So you would have been happier had he spent 20 minutes and then played rook ac1?
Yes. Actually, yes, because it would mean that he found something after knight b5 he didn't like, but
fair enough.
The way he played it, it feels like he didn't really even consider it properly. Or maybe he just thought that knight of 8 solves every single problem straight away, but
Gotcha.
It didn't seem like that. It seemed like it was a legitimate option.
My main problem is I can't see a plan at all. Like I can't.
Now I'm very much struggling for a plan for white. Yeah. Now that you planted your rooks on the c and d file, it feels like whatever you do, pieces will start to come off in huge batches.
Maybe you have to play a4 after rook ac1, but it's not
A4,
exactly
knight
inspiring.
g6.
Yeah.
I mean, black actually improved here. Knight f4 becomes an option next move, for instance. After knight b5, you threaten more or less nothing.
No, I agree.
Like knight h4 becomes a move here, maybe in some positions, you know, starting to ask some questions even on the king side. It's an obvious, you know, non-obvious development that you do this, especially that you do it in a minute and 20. He had an hour. He could spend 10 minutes on a move.
He's probably going to do it now, but sometimes it's one move too late.
But exactly. Not saying that he was winning or anything. Actually, probably quite comfortable saying he wasn't, considering just how level this position should be. Black really hasn't done anything bad to deserve being much worse. But
no, of course, but it's keeping the ball in play, which is the challenge here.
I think, you know, you play this opening to create a position in which there will be a lot of options for both sides, but then you should explore those options. You shouldn't be trying to, you know, put pressure simply on the clock.
And Kramnik's student is making another point in the chat. He's saying, most importantly, Karjakin is not scared like Vichy. I'm not sure if that's fair to Vichy, but I
I'm
think it's
also not
fair to Karjakin.
Yeah,
That he doesn't seem that afraid.
I think maybe an additional R in that sentence would have been slightly better and slightly less disparaging to Vichy. I think scarred maybe is a better way of describing it.
I was trying to figure out where to put the R.
Yeah, I'm not sure if Vichy was scared as such. I think the history of his encounters with Carlsen kind of influenced his choices and so on and so forth. It's not fears. I don't think Vichy fears anyone. It's just that subconsciously you remember how your games went, and that might weigh down on you. Whereas with Sergey, I think not that he has a good score against Magnus necessarily.
No, but also not terrible. Like
Yeah,
equal 20 minus 4 plus 1, something like that.
something like that. And
Well, now it's probably equal more. I think this is before the match.
yeah, and some of those games he lost, he was doing very well, and I don't know if that helps or doesn't. But like I remember that one of the Norway chess tournaments Sergey won. He started I think 4 out of 4, and then was completely winning with white against Magnus.
Briar, yeah, that was a
in the
big game.
which he somehow proceeded to lose by the first time control and still won the tournament.
No, I'm sure he's drawn his conclusions, but it seems more like he thinks, okay, I'll play quickly and avoid complicated situations, not so much like I'm afraid of this guy.
Yeah.
I don't know where I'm going with it.
But yeah, I do feel that it's a valid observation that this new generation of players, Sergey and Fabiano, maybe Hikaru to a lesser extent, because talk about scars, but he did finally win a game, so
Yeah.
he probably should be feeling a lot better now, because it was quite certainly something that must have been annoying him greatly. The fact that he
No, and also the even younger guys. Anish Giri has an equal score against
Yeah,
Magnus.
sure.
Wesley, so I'm not sure. Well, Wesley just lost in Bilbao, but yeah, there's a lot of guys that
I mean for
grow up with Magnus.
Yeah, for this young brigade, psychologically it might be easier for them to be playing Magnus.
Queen E1?
Queen E1, yeah, I'm not
Very
sure.
deep.
I'm not sure what this is. Maybe he's just planning to go Bishop F1 and actually playing against the knight G6 knight H4 plan.
This is not normally how you play
No.
for a big edge.
This is a bit weird because
So we were struggling to find a move. We just found a move, but it's not.
yeah, but I'm not sure what this is, to be honest. Let's say Black continues making the most natural moves in the position. You played knight F8, you play knight G6. Is Bishop F1 really what we are restricted to here? Is this what he was? Maybe he wants to go bishop. No, bishop C3, knight D5 leads nowhere. Knight C2 I refuse to even acknowledge, to be honest. Although maybe he wants to go. I mean, how ridiculous
I want to
is
go
this?
for my plan. Boom.
But now after knight H4, you
So
might actually start running into issues here. You can still play bishop F1, but or yeah F3. But yeah, you need to start calculating these things now. It probably doesn't work right now because Black. Yeah, I see no breakthroughs here for Black, but yeah, it's Rook AC1 followed by Queen E1 does not strike me as the most natural way of improving your pieces here.
No. Then again, I don't think Carlsen's ready to go home and start exchanging operations. That's
No.
why he's just trying to make moves that keep the pieces and the tension alive. But I agree. He's not pushing.
No, I think that sequence is somewhat uninspiring.
Yeah, you could. Well, knight d4. I have a soft spot for since I suggested it, but you could argue about any of those moves.
No, I
Rook
think
F1,
knight G4 and Rook F1 were decent choices, but yeah, I honestly think knight B5 had to be checked there. May have led to some slight edges somewhere from white. No, I'm very, very curious because I mean the only reason I can find for playing Queen E1 is actually to play Bishop F1 next move, but that's just such a weird restructuring of your light pieces.
Yeah, then again, this bishop looks nice on this diagonal, but it's not doing anything.
It's not doing a lot now that the knight landed on G6, sure, but perhaps you should have considered that before you played Rook AC1. And yeah, I'll stop. I mean, I understand I need to stop at some point, but yeah, it's a bit inconsistent. It looks like, he looks at every single position sort of separately.
That's how I play. Let's make a move. Now let's make another move.
Yeah.
Where you are saying you would like the moves to be more connected.
Yeah, and also paying maybe slightly more attention to what black is trying to achieve, because...
What is black trying to achieve?
Well, maybe he underestimated the idea of knight of AG6.
Come on, it's
Yeah, it would be weird.
not exactly a maneuver that is above Magnus's head.
Not suggesting it is, but I'm suggesting he allowed it to happen in, I think, maybe the most comfortable edition possible for black, which I don't understand the reasoning behind. Yeah, never end
Neither do I.
never end the sentence with a preposition or something. Which
I learned that from Big Bang Theory. I never believed it, though.
Yeah. Blasphemy. Not believing things you learned from BBT.
I stopped watching. Are you still watching? I've seen enough, like 8 seasons or something.
Yeah, I don't.
Enough is enough.
I am, but I don't know why, to be honest.
What is happening? No spoilers. But what's happening? Is Sheldon getting married? No spoilers.
I actually have like 3 unwatched episodes sitting on my hard drive. Can't bring myself to watch them. Really not that interested anymore. I feel like, you know, they've taken me hostage to a degree, and I will probably continue watching.
You have this weird thing that you can't stop watching anything, right? Once you
Yeah.
start watching a show, you finish it. So have you watched every Simpsons episode?
No, that I actually gave up on. There were too many of them.
But what other terrible shows are there? Prison Break Season 3, have you seen that?
And 4.
Whoa.
Yeah, that was time well spent. I really don't know why I did that. But you described my, you know, my problem very, very eloquently there. I can't seem to be able to give up on things.
I'm trying to think of
Why
other
is Sergey
examples.
not playing 96? Because I mean, he was also playing extremely fast up to this point, and 96 is...
Queen E1 threw him, caught him off guard, because everything else was more or less standard moves. But
Are we
now Queen
missing
E1, what is the guy doing?
Are we missing something there? Is it possible that we're actually missing some kind of a...
is, of course, not possible. Maybe F3 to cover this square.
Okay, but... I would actually become mildly interested in e6, e5 here, if I were black.
Booyah!
Queen e6. If you allow e4, you might start regretting some of your life choices here. Also, rook takes d3 is a threat. So.
Don't allow E4. Yeah. You might be right. Yeah.
No, I'm not sure.
How am I to argue?
Yeah, knight g6 has by now been played, so Sergey has taken only 5 minutes. I shouldn't have done.
That's not a surprise.
But yeah, I mean, he made somewhat less obvious moves faster in this game, so that's why. And bishop f1 blitzed out by Magnus.
From what I understood, you're going to be critical of any move played faster than in 20 minutes, because it does not appreciate the other options. Like
No,
F3,
no.
knight C2.
No, I think once you play Queen e1, you've settled on the idea of securing your kingside this way. But
You've made your bet, and now you got to sleep in it.
yep. Once again, e5 is not ridiculous, but maybe black doesn't really want to extend. Because
Would not be in Karjakin's match
Yeah.
style.
No, and in particular, with the bishop on f1, it loses some of its appeal, because you're probably not going to get a lot going on the king side now that white prepared for your potential activity there. Like maybe
Having said that, where do we go? Here?
maybe, yeah, knight c2 might also be, in this position, might also be a serious contender with the idea of b4.
Such a dumb square, though.
So yeah, it's not a very attractive square. Yeah, queen e6 is a good move, preparing bishop f8 for future reference. Maybe include rook to xd1, maybe not. I'm not sure if you need to. But yeah, e5 is not you know, an obvious decision for Sergey
he's
to
not gonna
take
play
here.
that.
Like knight d5 looks
This is
normal.
naturally enough.
Normal,
Do you go
yeah.
g3 with white at some point? Yeah, it's still scary, right? Like diagonals.
Probably not. Yeah, I don't feel particularly comfortable doing that.
What do you feel comfortable doing?
In this position, not sure, to be honest. Not sure at all.
I don't think white is worse, but it's hard to come up with constructive stuff, right? Might be fine.
Well, you can continue. You can continue shuffle stuff around, but none of these moves now create any threats. So.
Do you think maybe instead of rook ac1, he should have thought about knight b5? Maybe this was the moment to create some threats.
Yeah, I don't know. We didn't see it during the stream, so maybe it's obvious that that's not an option.
Fair enough. What do you think about going on break? Because that's what I normally feel very comfortable with. Get us some coffee or
Yeah, I think
anything else,
this might
caffeinated beverage.
I think this might be a good time for a bit of a break, and hopefully we can bring you some of the reactions to the ongoing struggle from the wonderful world of social media.
Is Fiona here actually? I don't know if she's here.
Yeah, that was maybe slightly over optimistic, but we hope she is, and she will do her segment. But if that doesn't happen, this will just be a coffee break, which is also very productive and useful. And
also for you guys, if we get coffee, you can get coffee. Those are the rules, and they will never change. So thank you so much for watching this show. Thank you for interacting with us in the chat. And if you're not a premium member, but you want to interact in the chat, you might want to consider Go Premium. Gives you access to all the video series. All the video series. You pay whatever you're paying, $9.99 per month. All the video series, literally thousands of videos. Some of them not very good. Some of them by Peter Svidler. That's all the play I can do today. We have a great database, blah, blah, blah. Go Premium.
I actually did some mug signing before this show, so there will be actual signed mugs for people to get if they go premium during the match. And Fiona is here, so she will be doing a social media roundup in this break. Which is
all right, then let's not keep people waiting any longer. Thank you guys for watching. Sergey Karjakin equalized, I believe it's fair to say, out of the opening against Magnus Carlsen. We shall be back in a while. Until then. Where do I click?
Here is good.
Click. Here? I don't think so.
That doesn't work, but you still should click here.
Okay, I'll click here. Let's see what happens.